There is an answer you already know. It is there intact waiting. Not in a book you haven't read yet, not in a conversation that hasn't happened yet, not in a next step that someone more experienced will point out to you. It is already in you, and the only reason you haven't been able to hear it clearly yet is that the level of noise around and within never drops low enough for it to become audible. This is not a metaphor, it is physiology. And it is also one of the most consistently documented practices in the scriptures as a precondition for real discernment. There is a discipline that the greatest names in spiritual history practiced with a regularity that draws attention, and which our contemporary culture treats as a luxury for those with time to spare, as introversion for those who don't know how to relate, or as escapism for those who don't want to deal with reality. This discipline is intentional silence, solitude practiced not as an absence of company, but as a deliberate presence with oneself and with that which sustains you. In this video, I will show you what happens neurologically when you stop, truly stop, and why this matters for the most difficult decisions you are facing right now. I will show you the biblical model of active solitude, which is completely different from passive isolation. And I will give you a practical structure to implement this in your real life with a real schedule, without needing a week-long spiritual retreat in the countryside. But there is a distinction in the middle of this video that completely changes how you will understand the moments when life forces you into silence, and which most people have never received. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. Subscribe and activate the bell. Let's start with what neuroscience has discovered about what happens in your brain when you finally stop. There is a neural network that researchers call the default mode network, the DMN, which enters operation precisely when you are not actively focused on an external task. For decades, neuroscientists considered this network as the brain in standby mode, low-importance activity that happened in the intervals between real tasks. They even called it neural noise. Researchers from Unicamp and other cognitive neuroscience centers in Brazil, working with this network, documented what was a complete reversal of this understanding.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.
The default mode network is not the brain at rest. It is the brain in a different and highly sophisticated type of processing. It is in this network that the integration of experiences, consolidation of learning, processing of complex decisions, construction of identity narrative, and access to insights that are not accessible during attentive focal processing occur. In simple terms, your best ideas, your most precise perceptions of complex situations, the solutions that appear in the shower or during a walk, do not arise despite the fact that you are not actively thinking. They arise because you stopped actively thinking. The default mode network finally had space to operate. The problem is that this network is suppressed during intense focal processing, and most people over 35, with professional schedules, family responsibilities, and constant consumption of digital content, are in almost uninterrupted focal processing for most of the day. Notifications, meetings, messages, decisions, content. The default mode network rarely receives the window of silence it needs to complete the work that only it can do. The University of São Paulo, in research on cognitive health and burnout in mid-career Brazilian professionals, identified a pattern that repeated consistently. Individuals who reported an inability to switch off, whose mental activity remained in focal processing mode, even during nominally free periods, demonstrated progressive impairment in strategic decision-making, creativity, and emotional regulation, not for lack of rest in the conventional sense, but due to deprivation of the default mode network. The brain that never stops actively processing never completes the work that only silence allows. And the most important decisions of your life, about direction, about relationships, about purpose, about what to build and what to let go, are exactly the type of complex processing that the default mode network needs silence to perform. You are not hearing the answer you already know, because you are not giving your brain the physiological condition to access it. Now I need to introduce you to the biblical model of solitude, because it is much more sophisticated than most readings deliver, and the distinction it makes will change how you interpret the periods of silence in your life. In Hebrew, there is a word that appears in wisdom literature and the Psalms with a frequency that should draw more attention than it does. The word is divomaya, dumia, sometimes translated as silence, sometimes as stillness, sometimes simply omitted in freer translations, but its semantics are precise and unique. Dumia is not the absence of sound. It is active stillness, the state of one who is present and receptive, not of one who is simply quiet. Psalm 62 opens with one of the densest phrases in the Psalter. Truly my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from Him. The word translated as finds rest is precisely dumia, and what the text is describing is not passivity, it is active orientation toward a source, the soul turned, positioned, directed to receive. Dumia is the opposite of two equally problematic states: the external noise that prevents reception, and the internal noise that seems like silence because it has no sound but continues to occupy all available processing. Rumination, circulating worry, the mental to-do list that spins even when the environment is quiet. You can be in a completely silent room and not be in dumia, and you can be in an environment with sound and, for a few moments, experience dumia, that rare clarity of being completely present, without internal noise competing for processing. What the scriptures propose is not management of the external environment. It is the cultivation of an internal state. Click like now if you are recognizing the difference between environmental silence and dumia, real internal stillness. This distinction is the heart of this episode. But now I need to take you to the character who, for me, is the most complete model of active solitude in the scriptures, and who is rarely presented from this angle. Jesus practiced solitude with a regularity and an intention that the text of the Gospels records consistently, and which becomes invisible when you read the episodes as isolated stories instead of patterns of life. Luke 5:16 says, "But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed." The verb in Greek is upochoreo, hypochoreo, which means to withdraw downwards, to retreat into a protected space, and the verb tense is the imperfect, which in Greek describes habitual, repeated, continuous action. Not an isolated episode, a pattern of life. He habitually withdrew. And the context in which Luke records this is revealing. The previous verse describes the expansion of the ministry, large crowds gathering to hear him and to be healed. At the height of demand, at the point of maximum exposure and external impact, Jesus withdrew. Not despite what was happening, in direct response to it. This completely inverts the logic that most of us learned about productivity and presence. The cultural model says, when demand increases, you increase presence. You do more, appear more, produce more. Jesus' model says, when demand increases, you protect the space for replenishment with more rigor, because the quality of what you offer in presence depends on what happens in absence. Mark records a specific episode that illustrates this with disconcerting precision. In chapter 1, after a day of high intensity in Capernaum, teaching in the synagogue, healing the demon-possessed, healing Peter's mother-in-law, then the whole city gathered at the door. Jesus wakes up early in the morning, leaves while it is still dark, and goes to a solitary place to pray. Simon and the others go after him and say, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus' response is not, "Then let's go back." It is, "Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also." That is why I have come. The solitude of the early morning was not an escape from demand. It was the space where direction for the next step was received. He returned from silence knowing where to go, with a clarity that the social demand of the previous day could not have generated. This is the pattern that the Desert Fathers of the 4th century, the monks who withdrew to Egypt and Syria, and whose practices Pukrio has documented research on in its theology and spirituality program, called hesychia. In Greek, ησυχία, hesychia, often translated only as stillness or silence, but in the tradition of the Desert Fathers, hesychia was an active discipline, a state of recollected attention, a practice of being present to God and to oneself in such a way that presence in the world was qualified, not diminished. They did not practice hesychia to leave the world. They practiced it to enter the world in a different way. Now I need to make the distinction I promised at the beginning, the one that changes how you interpret the periods of silence that life imposes on you, not just the ones you choose. There is a fundamental difference between two types of solitude, and confusing them has a real cost. The first type is formative solitude. It is what Jesus practiced in the desert before his public ministry, in the moments of deliberate hypochoreo, in the early morning of Capernaum. It is what Moses lived for 40 years in the desert of Midian before returning to Egypt. It is what Paul spent in Arabia after his conversion in Damascus, a period of silence and formation that preceded decades of transmission. Formative solitude has orientation. You are in silence not because you have nowhere to go, but because silence is the space where something necessary is being formed that is not formed anywhere else. The second type is escapist isolation. It is withdrawal from the world as a way to avoid confrontation with what needs to be faced. It is silence as anesthesia, not as formation. It is the solitude that Elijah experienced under the broom tree, not because he had chosen silence, but because he was too exhausted for anything else. And the text carefully records that God did not keep him there. The angel fed him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." Elijah's solitude under the broom tree was necessary for recovery, but it was not the destination. It was a transit station. Most people who are going through a period of involuntary silence, a career transition, a relationship that ended, a project that didn't move forward, a phase where the world seems to have paused while everyone around continues in motion, interpret this period exclusively through the second angle, as failure, as evidence of being left behind, as something to be ended as quickly as possible. But Moses' 40 years in the desert of Midian were not a waste of time. They were the formation of a leader who needed to know every stream and every root of that territory before leading a people through it for decades. Paul's silence in Arabia was not an absence of ministry. It was the cauldron where the theology that would sustain the Western Church for 2,000 years was distilled without interference. The question that transforms the interpretation of your period of silence is not, "When will this end?" It is, "What is being formed in me here that is only formed in this condition?" Right now in the comments, I am being formed, not as resignation, as repositioning. You are signaling to yourself that the silence you are in is neither punishment nor failure. It is hesychia, the space of formation that precedes what comes next. Right, I am being formed. Now I need to talk about the specific enemy of Dumia in your real life, not in abstract terms, but in the concrete day-to-day of someone over 35 with real responsibilities and a full schedule. Datafolha published research on time use in Brazilian adults that revealed a datum that should be disturbing to anyone who cares about the quality of their decisions. The average time that Brazilian adults spend in contact with some screen, television, cell phone, computer, tablet, has exceeded 10 hours daily. 10 hours. In a 16-hour waking day, most of the available time is in externally induced active focal processing. It is not a moral judgment. It is physiology. A brain that spends 10 hours in externally induced focal processing has a window of at most 6 hours for everything else, including sleep, eating, commuting, relationships, and any possibility of Dumia. In practice, the default mode network is being chronically deprived of the space it needs. And the result is not just fatigue, It is a specific form of disorientation, the feeling of being very busy and at the same time without clarity about where to go, of being in constant motion and at the same time without a sense of direction. It is possible to be in maximum motion and zero dumia simultaneously, and it is in this state that most people make the most important decisions of their lives. Researchers at the Brain Institute of UFMG, who study attention and cognitive regulation, identify this state as a chronic deficit of integrative processing, the ability to connect experiences, extract patterns, build long-term understanding, and access accumulated wisdom that is technically stored but cannot be accessed in uninterrupted focal processing mode. In biblical language, Psalm 46 says something that most people know but rarely hear in its deepest layer. Be still and know that I am God. The verb in Hebrew translated as be still is rapha, which literally means to slacken, to release tension, to let go of what is being held tightly. It is not an instruction of passivity. It is an instruction of active surrender, releasing the control of intense focal processing enough so that a deeper knowledge can emerge. Rapha is not giving up. It is stopping holding on so tightly so that what is waiting can finally arrive. Activate the bell now so you don't miss the next episode. Because in the next video, I will enter into a theme that is the natural consequence of what we are discussing today. How you discern, in silence, the difference between the voice of your formed intuition and the voice of fear disguised as wisdom. Because both arrive in the same tone of voice and the distinction is subtler than it seems. Activate the bell. There is a figure in the book of 1 Kings who is rarely remembered by name, but who represents perhaps the most documented case in the Bible of formative solitude in someone completely ordinary, without an established prophetic title, without a genealogy of leadership, without a previous history of great spiritual deeds. His name is Obadiah, not the minor prophet whose book bears the same name, another Obadiah, the administrator of King Ahab's palace, in a period when Ahab had introduced the worship of Baal in Israel and Jezebel had ordered the killing of the Lord's prophets. Obadiah, in the midst of the power apparatus of an idolatrous king, had hidden 100 prophets in caves, 50 in each, and sustained them with bread and water. The text describes this in 2 verses, almost in passing, as context for the larger story of Elijah. But what those 2 verses describe is extraordinary. A man operating in radical silence, in total invisibility, sustaining what needed to be preserved in a period when visibility equaled death, without recognition, without an audience, without public validation of what he was doing, in dumia forced by context, and using that dumia as a space of faithfulness to what had been entrusted to him. Obadiah is the pattern of one who operates in silence, not because he chose silence as a lifestyle, but because he understood that in that specific period, silence was the only environment where what needed to survive could survive. And when Elijah appears and confronts Obadiah, the phrase Obadiah uses to present himself is, I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. The identity formed in silence precedes the public appearance. What was built in obscurity is what he carries when he is finally seen. This pattern, identity formed in silence before public appearance, is consistent throughout the biblical narrative. Moses in the desert of Midian, Paul in Arabia, John the Baptist in the desert, Jesus in Nazareth for 30 years before 3 years of public ministry. The proportion of silence to public presence in these cases should be disturbing to those who live in a culture that equates visibility with value. What was formed in silence is what sustains the public presence when it finally arrives. Now for the practical steps. Because dumia without an implementation structure remains at the level of aspiration, and aspiration without practice transforms nothing. The first step is to create what medieval monks called a fixed hour of silence, and what contemporary psychology calls temporal anchoring of practice. I am not talking about an hour of meditation before dawn. I'm talking about a minimum and sustainable commitment, 15 minutes a day at the same time, without a screen, without audio, without a task. Research from the University of São Paulo on habit formation in adults over 40 confirms what monks discovered empirically centuries before. Temporal anchoring is the strongest predictor of practice sustainability. Not duration, not intensity, regularity at the same point of the day. 15 minutes a day of real dumia are worth more, neurologically and spiritually, than 3 occasional hours of silence when the schedule finally allows. The second step is to distinguish dumia from absence of stimulation. You can sit in silence and spend the 15 minutes ruminating on what you need to resolve tomorrow. That is not dumia. It is focal processing without external stimulus, which is different. Dumia requires a deliberate orientation. What the Desert Fathers described as the recollection of attention, bringing back repeatedly the dispersed processing to an anchor point. It can be a word, a phrase, an internally declared intention before the silence. The secular equivalent is what mindfulness researchers at PUCSP call an attention anchor, a deliberate return point when processing wanders. You don't need years of contemplative practice for this. You need clear intention before sitting and kindness to bring the thought back when it wanders, without frustration, without judgment about how often it wanders. The third step is to treat periods of involuntary silence with the same question as formative ones. When life imposes silence, a wait, a transition, a period where the doors you expected did not open, the formative question is not, when will this end? It is, what is being formed here that is only formed in this specific condition? This is not passive resignation. It is a repositioning of interpretation that completely changes what you do with the available time. Moses in the desert of Midian could have spent 40 years embittered by the distance from Egypt. The text does not indicate that he knew he would return, but the text indicates that he became a shepherd, that he learned to know the territory, to care for what was under his responsibility, to work with what there was. The formation happened not because he knew in advance what it was for. It happened because he positioned himself as someone who was learning, not just waiting. The fourth step is to protect the silence from people who cannot tolerate it for you. This is harder than it seems. There is real social pressure on people who practice deliberate recollection, especially in the Brazilian cultural context, where presence and sociability have high value and intentional silence can be interpreted as distance, arrogance, or an emotional problem. You will need clarity about the value of what you are protecting to defend the space when the pressure comes. Jesus' instruction is direct on this point. In Matthew 6, when he speaks about prayer in silence, he uses the term tamion, which means inner chamber, private room, the protected space within. When you pray, go into your tamion and close your door. It is not an instruction of secrecy or separation from people. It is an instruction to create and defend the interior space of dumia, even if on the outside the world continues in full demand. You don't need to explain to everyone what you do in your silence. You need to do it. The fifth step is to record what emerges. The default mode network processes in images, in fragments, in insights that arrive non-linearly and dissipate quickly if they are not anchored in language. What researchers call insight capture, the immediate recording of perceptions that arise in the state of rest, is the bridge between the processing that happens in silence and the application that happens in presence. This can be as simple as a notebook next to the space of silence. Not for extensive analysis, for quick capture, a phrase, an image, a question that arose, whatever comes. The goal is not to transform silence into content production. It is to not lose what silence delivered when focal processing resumes control and sweeps the insight from working memory. Let me tell you what is at stake beyond your personal practice. The culture we live in is in a chronic deficit of people who think slowly. Not that they don't think, but that they can sustain the slow, integrative processing that produces wisdom instead of just information, discernment instead of just opinion, direction instead of just movement. The HeartMath Institute, in its research on heart coherence and decision-making, documented that states of high physiological coherence, produced in part by practices of intentional silence, are associated with significantly superior quality of decision-making in situations of high complexity. Not because the person thought more, because the integrated system operated more coherently, heart, brain, and autonomic nervous system in synchronicity, instead of each pulling in a different direction under the pressure of uninterrupted focal processing. The people who most need your presence, your children, your spouses, your collaborators, your communities, do not need you with more access, more availability, more constant physical presence. They need you with more quality of presence, and quality of presence is produced in silence, not in continuous movement. Obadiah sustained 100 prophets in the silence of caves, while the surrounding culture shouted Baal. What he preserved in silence survived the period of noise and emerged at the moment it was necessary. What you are preserving and forming in your silence now will be exactly what will be available to be given when the moment calls. If this video named something you needed to hear, share it with someone who is in a period of involuntary silence and is interpreting that period as failure. Sometimes, the most important thing someone needs is the permission to understand that the silence they are in is not punishment, it is formation. You can be the one who delivers that permission. Share it. Let me close with what you learned here. You learned that the default mode network, the neural system that processes integration, insight, and wisdom, operates in silence, not in active focal processing. And that chronic deprivation of this silence is not just fatigue, it is a measurable impairment of the ability to make the most important decisions of your life. You learned that Dumia is not the absence of sound. It is active-oriented stillness, the state of one who is present and receptive, not of one who has simply stopped speaking. You learned that Jesus practiced hyperchoreo, deliberate withdrawal, not despite increasing demand but in direct response to it, and that Hesychia, the discipline of the Desert Fathers, was not withdrawal from the world, but preparation for quality of presence in the world. You learned the distinction between formative solitude and escapist isolation, and that the periods of silence that life imposes on you can be interpreted by the formative question. What is being formed here that is only formed in this condition? You learned that Rafa, to slacken, to release tension, is not giving up. It is the precondition for what is waiting to be able to arrive, and that Jesus Tamaeon is not secret or isolation. It is the interior space of Dumia that you create and defend, regardless of external noise. And you learned that what Obadiah preserved in silence was what would survive the period of noise and emerge when necessary. What you are forming in your silence now is what will be available to be given when the moment calls. Now what do? You find the 15 minutes. You anchor it at the same time. You orient your attention deliberately, bring it back when it wanders, without judgment. You treat involuntary silence with the formative question instead of the question of urgency. And you record what emerges, because what the default mode network delivers in silence is exactly the answer you already know, and that the noise would not let you hear. The answer you are seeking is already in you. Silence is not where you go to seek it, it is where you will finally be able to hear it. Rafa.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.